everybody. I'm going to talk to you today about Moses and the 10 plagues that were brought up on Egypt. Remember, before we left school, we had talked about Moses being a baby and put into the river, and the princess found him, and Moses grew up in Pharaoh's kingdom. And then we talked about how Moses left and he was taking care of sheep. And then one day God talked to him through the burning bush, but the bush did not burn up. And God told Moses, I want you to go to Pharaoh and tell Pharaoh to let my people go. Well, you can learn all of these stories in the Bible. And this story I'm going to talk about today is in the book of Exodus, and it begins in chapter 7. Moses, God told him to go to Pharaoh and to tell Pharaoh to let his people go. So God had Aaron, Moses' brother, to go with Moses to tell Pharaoh. Well, Pharaoh is another name for king. Pharaoh did not believe in God. He made God's people, the Israelites, work hard because they were his slaves. He did not believe that God was going to cause anything to happen in Egypt. God told Moses, he said, Moses, be prepared because I am going to cause plagues to happen to Egypt. And then Pharaoh will know that I am God and he will let my people go. Moses went to Pharaoh and he told Pharaoh, God said to let my people go. And if you don't let my people go, God's going to cause things to happen in Egypt. Well, Pharaoh said no. So the first thing that God did, he caused the Nile River and all the other waters in Egypt to turn to blood. So that meant that all of Egypt had no water in their wells or the rivers. It was so bad that all of the fish died. But God took care of his people that were in the land of Goshen. After the blood, Pharaoh asked Moses to please pray to God and have him remove this plague. Well, Pharaoh still would not let the people go. So God caused frogs to hop everywhere. They were so many frogs that they were in the beds of people, and they were on people's heads, and they were all over the place. They were so high that they piled them up, and they really, really stank. The next plague was lice. It's like little bitty bugs all over the skin, and the people itched really, really bad, and it was everywhere. And even Pharaoh had lice upon him. But God took care of his people in Goshen, and they didn't have this problem. After the lice, Pharaoh said, please pray to your God that he'll remove this. Moses prayed, but Pharaoh still would not let the people go. So God caused the plague of flies to come. Flies was everywhere, swarming all over the place, in people's hairs and in their mouth and in their food. But Pharaoh still would not let the people go. Then after that, God caused all the cattle to die, which was the cows and the sheep, and they were all over the place. But Pharaoh still would not let the people go. So then God caused boils to be up on the people's skin. And these are really, really painful boo-boos. And they're red and they hurt and they really, really itch. And all the people had it, even the king. And the people went to Pharaoh and said, Pharaoh, please let the people go. But Pharaoh still would not let them go. God told Moses to tell Pharaoh that he was going to bring another bad plague and that he was going to cause it to hail in the sky. and that Pharaoh needed to be sure that all the animals and his people were inside. But Pharaoh did not believe. God made hail fall from the sky, which is big chunks of ice. And all of Pharaoh's people, or cattle that was outside, they died. Well, Pharaoh still did not let the people go. And the hail, it had killed all the plants. But what was left, the locusts came and they gobbled up. So now the people really had nothing to eat. After the locusts went away, God caused it to be very, very dark for 3 days. It was so dark and so thick that the people could not see each other. After the 3 days of darkness, Pharaoh still would not let the people go. So God told Moses that he was going to cause the worst plague ever to happen. So Moses was to warn the Israelites that they were to take lamb's blood and paint it on the doors of all of their houses. And this was to protect them from the last plague. Pharaoh still would not let the people go. And that night, the death angel flew over Egypt. And God's people who had painted the lamb's blood on the door, they were safe. But in Egypt, Pharaoh and all the people's firstborn babies, they died. And this caused a lot of the people to cry. And Pharaoh finally realized how powerful God was, and he said, I will now let the people go. In the end, Pharaoh realized that God is the one and true God, and God has the power to do whatever he wants to do. Remember, you can read this in your Bible. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see all of you soon.